Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 88, featuring Stephen King and Brock Haugen, co-founders of The Indexing Company. Stephen and Brock, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Good.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Glad
to be
here.
Joining. Thanks for joining, Stephen. Happy to have you. I was very interested when I was looking at your website for the Indexing Co. and kind of hearing your pitch about what you've been looking at and doing in the Web3 space. You know, here on the show, we've been looking at kind of the concept of data sovereignty in Web3 and the idea that, you know, we all know about the data practices in Web2 and kind of traditional internet. And needless to say, there's not much sovereignty, right? There's a lot of just everyone checks the box they need to check and gives up access to their devices, and a lot of you know, advertisers and big companies are using that data for very lucrative reasons, but we don't get to see where it goes. We usually don't get the benefit from a lot of the, you know, lucrative advertising dollars that come because of it. So we're hoping that, you know, with Web3 and with this new era, that we're going going to see a lot more sovereignty, and that people will have accountability, transparency, and really line of sight towards kind of how their data is being used. So with all that, I want to thank everyone, all of our listeners. Welcome to Web3 Warriors. I am David Karoma, I go by Chrome in the Metaverse, your host. And as I mentioned, today we're looking at data management in Web3 and how can we really shift from the old ethos of data in Web2 and the way that a lot of these social media companies and other companies that are on our phone are using or maybe misusing our data, and shift into kind of a new era of the internet, you know? And so on the show, we often look at the metaverse, we look at NFTs and the creator economy, but we also like to hear from developers and actual blockchain-based companies, projects that are being built out and solving real-world problems. So today we're really excited to have both Steven and Brock here from the Indexing Company to kind of share a little bit about how their business is kind of embarking into this new kind of Web3 frontier of data management and how it differs kind of from Web2. So with that, you know, maybe we'll dive into a little bit of your background, Steven and Brock, before we dive into really the data question and how the Indexing Company is tackling that. So maybe we'll start with you, Brock. If you could just share a little bit about, you know, what brought you to Web3, what brought you to the blockchain, and then we'll jump over to Steven.
Yeah, absolutely. So myself, been a longtime engineer now, over 10 years. Found blockchain back in 2016. I was actually just bored at my day job. So I was like, what is this blockchain thing? Let me go dive in. Ended up on a Ethereum job board where I met Steven. So he was looking for help at his startup. That's where we met, kind of took off from there.
Nice. So how many years do you say you've been in the blockchain space?
It's been 7 now. Yeah.
Wow. So quite a few of the winters you've been through, you know, so you've probably learned those hard lessons, you know.
very, very familiar these days. Yeah.
Nice. I'll jump to you, Steven. What's your background? How long have you been in the Web3 and blockchain space, and what brought you to it?
Yeah, so I got in around 2013, and it was initially just with Bitcoin, and actually that community did me a real service because it was so toxic at the time that it pushed me into Ethereum. I come across the white paper, and they were gearing up for their ICO, and so I took all of my BTC and put it in ETH, and then started learning about that and IPFS over the years. And I was previously in real estate, and you know, your introduction is actually interesting because you'd mentioned people owning their data, and in the real estate industry, every company basically takes all of their data and then they give it either to an MLS or some kind of aggregator, but they lose complete control over that data, and then they get charged an arm and a leg just to access it. And so when I met Brock and I found a really unique way to basically take, you know, tie Ethereum with IPFS and some other things like OrbitDB, and to start to turn that on its head. So basically provide a way that these anybody really with data could either put it out into IPFS as a backup or as something that they want to share through a front end, but maintain control throughout that process. And so we had some fun building that out with companies like Toll Brothers. We even created a financial product around multifamily escrow using smart contracts. So basically taking tenant deposits, processing them through a smart contract, and then Sterling Equities, the real estate outfit we were working with, they would basically reinvest or earn a return or something like that. So that got kind of tied up with regulation, and then Brock and I synced back up late last year and created the Indexing Company, and that's what we're here to talk about. So we're excited.
That's pretty fascinating. On that escrow piece, and you say, you know, tied up in regulation, I can imagine how that goes, but it's a really cool kind of, was that all on chain? So like even the investments were done kind of like using DeFi and, you know, to grow?
Yeah. So Signature Bank had something called Signet, and they had their own token, but it was basically they just forked Ethereum and used the EVM basically infrastructure. So it was a closed, unfortunately, it wasn't just, you know, wasn't on any of the alive Ethereum blockchain, but actually it was good for us though, because we got some insights into how banks are thinking about this technology, and that they're actually using it, and they're working towards eventually being able to settle on some of these public ecosystems. But we need to get some of the ZK stuff, I guess, figured out first.
No doubt, that ZK rollup and being able to or zero knowledge proof, being able to actually have privacy of some level while still using the public blockchain. That's really fascinating, though. Very cool background. So with that, maybe Stephen, sticking with you, what is the mission and vision of the indexing company, and how did it kind of grow out of your collaboration there?
Yeah, so Brock, after Imbrex, Brock went and I'll let him talk about this because he can do it much more eloquently, but he went and did a stint at Coinbase, and he came back to me and he said, "Hey, Stephen, it's the data problem is even worse on the corporate side of Web3." And he had some pretty interesting insights on how we could do indexing way better than the existing solutions. And so we had basically, I think that was in summer of what, Brock, was that 2022?
Yeah, last year. Yep.
Yeah, and then so we just we started building it out, and then January we launched, and it really is as simple as, hey, if you're building a product in Web3, it should be easy to access and process data. And today, if you want to access it, I mean, if you come from Web2 and you're building a product, you're looking at employing multiple third-party APIs, and then you have to build all this custom logic on top. So it's really messy. And that's the standard. That's what everybody does. And so, we took Brock's insights, which were very smart, and built out this product that's end-to-end so that people don't have to think about it. So Brock, I'm going to give it to you because you do a wonderful job at summarizing this.
Well, let's hear it, Brock.
No. I thought that was great. My butchered version or oversimplified is we're trying to solve data accessibility. So yeah, Stephen and I were coming back to the market last summer, wanting to build something, realized in order to build something, we'd still have to rebuild all the infrastructure in-house. And that was just kind of table stakes to even get to the product that we might want to build. So that's where we're like, okay, we got to do this kind of as a dedicated company, as a service, if you will. And so that's where, me not being the creative one came up with the indexing company. We do indexing as a service.
Hey, if no one else took it, you can be the indexing company. You're
exactly.
making a wave.
Yeah.
Brand new opportunity, I think. So how is it solving the problem? How is it creating that kind of streamlining and cutting out some of that, extra kind of time and requirements on kind of the above layer? How is it cutting out that and making things more streamlined?
Yeah, so there's a lot of issues here. But if we go all the way up to the top, blockchain data is already decentralized. It's already out there. It's already public. It's just really difficult and expensive to get at.
Right.
And so there's a lot of companies out there like the Alchemies of the world that are indexing that data. They put it in some sort of centralized database and they resell API access. So really what they're doing is they're selling data. They're data companies. We were kind of looking at this market and realized, okay, if you're using somebody else's API, A, that's going to get expensive fast. B, that's not going to fit your product. There is no configuration there. It's just you get what you get, and it's up to you to bridge that gap between the API and your product.
Right.
So
it's not bespoke, essentially. Like it's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And it just felt backwards. Like if you look, for any engineers familiar, like if you look at something like AWS doesn't tell you that you have to build with this particular server. Like you can mix and match pieces, you can configure it, right? To fit your needs. And so we thought that data should be that way as well. And so, what we've built out now is a fully configurable data pipeline where we have no centralized database. It's fully distributed systems right now, decentralized later. And it lets customers come in and configure top to bottom the data they want, on-chain, off-chain, private data sets, the work being done on that data, so the transformations, could be aggregation pipelines, custom code, whatever it is, then ultimately where this data gets delivered. So usually it ends up in their own database based on their own schemas. Wow. So it does that end-to-end pipeline without them having to reinvent the wheel on any of the infrastructure in between.
Very cool. Very cool. So how does that fit into like the security side of things and what kind of AML, KYC, that's where I think the data becomes the most sensitive, right? And I think we've seen entities like Chainalysis, for example, and those that like are heavily in that kind of AML space, trying to analyze data specifically for security reasons. Where do you fall into that? And is that kind of part of what you guys do, or is it not as much directly dealing with kind of AML and actual security issues on chain? Because I know that's a huge regulatory concern, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of where we come to the market as sort of an agnostic provider. So we can help those firms as absolutely. At Coinbase, I worked on a lot of like internal auditing tools, for instance. And kind of the key unlock here is all this data is starting out public to begin with. It's on chain already.
Right.
So these same pipelines work for those cases. And it's really just about helping and empowering companies to then leverage that data in the way that makes sense for them.
Cool. Oh, that's fascinating, and I can see the problem you're solving for sure. So taking a step back, how do you view this? And maybe we'll go back to Steven and then we'll jump over to Brock, but how do you view the conversation around data? And do you think that kind of this evolution into Web3 data management, like you were just saying, Brock, as far as the data being public already, how do you see kind of the blockchain playing a huge role in the way that we view our data going forward? Or do you think that, blockchain can be kind of that savior to offer, actual data sovereignty, essentially? How do you see this kind of evolution taking place?
I hope so. I'm glad that the conversation's taking place, because for the longest time, data was kind of an afterthought, and so everybody kind of knew in the back of their head, hey, at some point we're going to have to deal with this, because all the data is out there, and you would think that hey, it's open source, right? We could just go and grab it, but it's really not that easy, and it introduces a whole bunch of other challenges that at least I didn't think about, but it does enable things like control. So the ability to, back to the real estate example, basically put out a real estate listing for sale, and almost like just kind of like turning on a light switch, in a dark building. It's just have a UI. If I want to go over here to this UI because it's got eyeballs on it, I can basically have that listing showcase there, and I can maintain control of the actual data itself, and not basically give ownership of it to that platform. So I think it's there, but we gotta clean up. I think for Web3 in general to scale, it's got to be easier to do things. It's got to be easier and cheaper to build. So on average right now, if you want to build an application and scale it, you get product market fit, you're going to spend at least $200,000 or $300,000 just building out these pipelines just to get access to your own data and clean it up,
right?
Which is crazy. And then you have things like AI, entering the space. And AI, this is great, right? Open data. They do things like federated learning, where they're able to just take advantage of new data sources and things like that, but they can't do that until we lower the barrier to entry on some of these infrastructure components. So, but that's what we're doing, and that's what other people are doing on the UI UX side, which I think will help. And we're seeing that on the corporate side. I don't know if you're seeing this, but we're actually seeing companies now, not like 2017, 2018, just getting a PR article. And kind of saying, okay, cool. They're actually like building tools, which is cool to see.
Yeah, 100%. What about you? What are your thoughts, Brock, as far as the evolution? You think it's just going to be like a user experience, kind of like general society basically has to catch up and we're just not quite there yet? Or do you think that there are, some, I don't know, I guess my worry is that certain powers that be are obviously getting a lot of money out of kind of the status quo of the data usage, right? And so, you almost have to upset the apple cart in order to actually allow for this new kind of Web3 era of data ownership or data sovereignty, people actually seeing how their data is being used and maybe being able to say, no, I don't want my data being used that way. So I just wonder how the evolution's doing. And it sounds like you guys are right on the forefront of it. So maybe you're seeing both on the corporate side and on maybe the more social society-wide level, how things are evolving. Any thoughts on that, Brock?
Yeah, so many. But I guess kind of two big ones. A slightly controversial opinion is I think that one of the ways to mass adoption is actually getting and proving to these existing corporations why putting data out in a decentralized medium is a net positive for them, net positive for their bottom line, net positive for their infrastructure. For me, I kind of see it as the evolution of, all right, we used to host servers in our own offices, then we went to cloud computing, now we go to decentralized computing. It's kind of an evolution in my head.
Yeah.
But conversely, like giving power and control back to kind of the everyman, I think one of the concepts that we've been toying with internally is this idea of composable indexes. So letting companies, individuals, whoever it might be, go index, process data, clean it, put that index data back out in a decentralized medium, and then creating a kind of a royalty marketplace on top of that. So you now incentivize the whole network to process data, use data, consume data, and you can kind of trace it all the way around.
Yeah, no doubt. And how do you feel about like kind of the way, like I know there's the Brave browser, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with them, right? Yep. And they are kind of, like you said, incentivizing sharing your data for the sake of advertisements, and even incentivizing clicking on advertisements where they pay you out in their Brave coin or whatever the case might be. Do you see a future for that kind of like more clear? And it ultimately comes down to people having to take the initiative to choose the platforms that use their data that way, right? So I think a big part of it is just social evolution, and hopefully people care more and are more concerned about the way that their data is being used. But do you think something like a Brave browser, the way they've kind of gone about trying to still have ad revenue but making it more opt-in, and then you also get rewarded from it, is that kind of the way that you see data usage kind of evolving?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's trying to really break it all down to per unit costs. So even if we look at, say, the music industry trying to be on chain, we keep trying to solve royalties. And one of the recurring themes there is, okay, well, can we like charge micropayments based off of, say, every second that you listen to a song, right? And so if you can start to break that down enough, and all the incentives make sense, it's kind of a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, for sure. And we do see a lot of these new kind of on-chain streaming options that are coming out with different ways to use your data. Any thoughts on that, Steven?
I was just going to say, David, it's like podcasting too, right? I mean, soon enough, right? The advertisers are just going to say, here's $100,000 for 6 ads. And basically you'll get as much money as many listeners listen to the full ad, being able to track that and just have a smart contract basically pay you out of that. I mean, 100%. It seems like that's inevitable.
Yeah, that's the future. And that's where it is good for business ultimately. You know, I think there's ethical things that are also a good outcome of that, but ultimately it is also good for business. And I think as that evolves, it's going to be really exciting. And so how do you feel about kind of the way data can be used, kind of, again, going back to the way it has been, kind of a more pillaging, kind of like just taking, and then actually having ownership, you know, of your own data? Is that something that indexing company is basically like pitching? Is that something you talk about when you kind of reach out to potential clients and merchants? Like, is it kind of that ethical evolution, or, you know, that evolution from taking data to actually giving data and having ownership of your data? Is that an ongoing kind of conversation that you're often coming up against, or
Yeah, it's at least in our, I guess, kind of sales pitches, the way it generally comes up is companies want to own their data because they see it as part of their unique proprietary edge, if you will. It's part of their product. And so that's something that we're enabling and selling, in the sense that this data was out there in the public. We're now letting customers control the entire pipeline, and the data ends up in their database as their data. So they get that in control in that regard.
Nice. And does that filter down to their clients as well?
Yeah, and so then it's what we haven't figured out is how to get past that. But theoretically, yes, this gives them then the model to continue fulfilling that further. But this is where, we kind of think all the way back to those composable indexes where, all right, maybe we work with the Block Explorer, they go index raw on-chain data. Some individual comes along and wants to use that, they can pay the Block Explorer some small royalty to use that further.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. I can see that coming for sure.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's certain blockchains kind of doing this better than other blockchains? And are you partial to, obviously you mentioned Ethereum and the EVM and really, you know, the programmability there, but then on the scalability side, maybe, you know, they don't have the scalability you might need for something like this. Maybe I'll start with Steven and then we can jump to Brock. Do you have thoughts on different blockchains handling data better than others? Are you partial to anyone? I know you mentioned you spoke highly of Ethereum already.
Yeah, just because Ethereum is where we got our start, so it's near and dear to our hearts. But actually, Brock, I'm keen to hear your what you say on this. But we've been following our customers. So we support right now over 30 chains, and it's really like our customer, or one of our earlier ones, got us into Tezos. And that was actually it's kind of cool, because for me, I didn't know a lot about Tezos, and I thought Tezos was dead. But
I love
they're
Tezos.
working on they're working on some interesting things. Like they're working with the state of California to put all driver's licenses on the Tezos chain, which just blew me away.
Nice.
So for me, it's been helpful from just an educational point of view, but from an infrastructure and building point of view, I'm not the guy to ask that question to. Brock is definitely the guy. So I'll hand that off to you, Brock.
What are your thoughts, Brock, as far as blockchain infrastructure and data usage?
Yeah, I was trying to offer one of the first things that I try to do personally is reframe it from crypto to Web3, like separating those out. So yeah, thinking about it as Web3. How do we just like deal with decentralized data? Because then it also gives you a lens to, it's not just blockchains that are involved, but other protocols as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so Stephen and I, we've been longtime supporters of IPFS, really like the content addressable data, but it doesn't solve the data storage piece. So that's still something there. They have Filecoin, it hasn't quite caught on. Yeah, something. Arweave seems to be doing this best as far as the data storage itself. There's a lot of potential there, I think.
Does Arweave have pretty extreme limitations though, as far as how much you can put on there? Or
no, they're one of the like, I forget the numbers now, but I think they have petabytes out there.
Wow.
They do a really good job at data storage. So now if you can kind of start to bridge some of these concepts together, especially if you start dealing with a decentralized consensus medium, something like a blockchain, like an Ethereum or an L2, I think as you put all those technologies together, you end up with something really powerful. I don't know if that directly answers it, but that's kind of where I've been sitting, is it's no one winner. It's kind of a holistic thing.
Yeah, no, it's cool to hear about other projects Tezos is working on, because I just see a very vibrant, cool art community, and I have a lot of art NFTs on Tezos, but I have no idea what else they do on Tezos. And if that was all they did forevermore, I would be happy with it.
Yeah,
no, you're a good. Yeah, you're in good company with Tezos. It's actually a project that things are happening.
Cool. That's awesome. That's very good to know. So my NFTs won't be useless or worthless at some point in the future. They're building up. They've got a lot of opportunities. And I think Solana works with Arweave Direct, don't they? Have you been dabbling with Solana at all? They've been making a lot of pretty big partnerships in the last few months.
Oh yeah. So we also do Solana indexing and Arweave indexing. So they're both chains, pulling both in. Yeah, a lot of cool, interesting concepts there.
Nice. And how do you view that Solana versus Ethereum? Maybe I think they seem to be pretty high competitors. There's the speed on the Solana side, and then there's the real decentralization on the Ethereum side. That's the way I kind of look at it. And I'm a fan of both, so it doesn't have to be either or. But do you have any thoughts around kind of the evolution of Solana and how you see it coming up? You know, I don't think it's going to be an ETH killer, but I do think it's an interesting kind of contrast there.
I'll be curious to get Steven's thoughts, but yeah, I share your sentiment far more. I want to get to a point where I can run an EVM node on my phone. Like I want this fully decentralized, and I want access to that data in a decentralized medium. And I think Solana, in order to get reduced latency, has kind of gone the opposite direction. Just different use cases.
Yeah, they are very centralized on the nodes. Yeah, Steven.
I love Solana. I really do. I think it's. I don't think it's going to kill Ethereum. I think it's got a very different use case, and I think Solana will cater to the trading community, like Wall Street, investment banking. I really do. I think it's set up perfectly for that, and we're actually seeing a lot of companies in that domain enter on this, like playing around with Solana very seriously, actually. And there's a couple of really good projects that started out on Solana, like Pith. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I think Solana is a good bet. I think they have great tech. I think it is different than Ethereum, and that's why it does have a different use case. It's not as decentralized. You're absolutely correct. But I do think it has good technology, and I do think that it'll be one of the ones that sticks around.
No doubt. Cool. That's very good perspectives there. And looking at like the core infrastructure, I know you're on EVM. Is there a specific chain? Because you mentioned you're supporting over 30. Is there a specific blockchain that you're reliant on for kind of your core infrastructure, if you're able to share, or is it like you very much just kind of cater to each different blockchain has its own solution kind of thing?
More so, we've got a truly generalized solution that works for any chain. So internally, we call these heartbeats, and we have pacemakers per chain. So these are just like little tiny adapters that let us go out and pull all of the block data as blocks come in real time. And so something we do internally then from there is it works for, say, a Bitcoin or a Solana or an EVM chain, all the same. And then we put that back out into a currently distributed file storage internally, and that's what we index off of. So it's kind of a cache, if you will.
Wow, that's pretty epic. And how do you see Bitcoin ecosystem kind of needing this? It would be mostly from like a financial transaction tracking perspective, as opposed to, you know, a lot of these other blockchains are much more programmable and have a whole lot of like ecosystem activity, whereas blockchain, it's like, did transaction X get to, you know, person B, you know? Yeah, is that pretty much it, or how does Bitcoin use your service?
Yeah, Bitcoin is it's a interesting use case in that the community seems staunchly opposed to non-transaction data. Obviously there's that angle,
damned, right?
Right. But I was going to say ordinals and the whole advent of those has introduced some interesting capabilities. So we're able to index those ordinals for a few companies and kind of like merge those as data streams with NFTs and other projects in those veins.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. That whole ordinals conversation, I think, is a very interesting one, because the diehards of the kind of traditional Bitcoin space have very good reason, I think, to be upset with those ordinals guys. And they're just going degen with it and kind of doing whatever the hell they want to do on the blockchain. And, you know, our transaction fees are higher than ever before. And it's kind of crazy. Do you have thoughts on ordinals at all, either of you?
It's really hard to index. I tried as a non-engineer. I tried to index it, and it was the standards in Bitcoin are so different than every other chain. It was crazy. But anyway, go ahead, Brock. I think I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh no, you're totally good. I was just going to say ordinals are, in my opinion, they're a fun hack. Like it's obviously not what Bitcoin was meant for, but yeah, I'm enjoying it. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
No doubt. That's exciting. Yeah. So we do want to always try to give a little bit of value to our listeners on the sense of, you know, how can they do things differently? And I think that when looking at data and looking at security in Web3 is very important, right? Like, not your keys, not your crypto kind of thing, but also don't click the links, don't listen to random FOMO, random airdrops and all this kind of stuff. Do you have thoughts from your kind of professional perspective? You know, how does the average person out there just make sure that they're handling their data appropriately in Web3? Start with you, Brock, and then go to Steven.
Yeah. Don't take anything at face value. That's kind of a rough recommendation, but even looking at, say, like the Etherscans of the world, they're trusted, or other API providers, but it's just humans behind the scenes doing their best to index all this data. And so there will be bugs. So if you really want root truth, you got to go straight to the chain. I mean,
do your own research on that. Don't trust random people.
Yep.
Any other thoughts, Steven?
Yeah. So just in terms of sensitive on-chain data, we haven't had that much. I guess we have, but we haven't like started to put like social security numbers on chain or things like that. So it'll be interesting when we store medical records, right? Like, so that's why I guess a lot of the ZK stuff would tie into those conversations. But so right now, I don't think that like data, you have to be too worried about anything sensitive leaking, unless I'm not thinking of something. But basically, the way that I think about on-chain data is it's kind of like you just have to be comfortable with what you put on there right now. It's sort of like the early days of using a credit card, right? Like, I'm not spending money online. That's crazy. You know, it was just a very foreign thing until it was natural. That's how Web3 feels right now. It feels like everything is, and Web3 is different in that there's a hack every other week. And so people, in fact, I think you have to lose money to properly be onboarded into Web3, you know, without which you're not allowed in. Yeah. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve in this next cycle, because I think we will start to see more sensitive data sets make it on chain. And that's where a lot of the CK stuff, I guess we're going to find out how well it works. And I haven't played around with it that much, so I can't talk to it. Maybe you can, Brock, but that's kind of what I'm keeping my eye on and paying attention to.
Yeah, and the promise of the ZK is essentially, actual privacy while keeping the most important data public, right? You want to speak to that a little bit, Brock? What is the promise of ZK, and how are we going to be seeing it roll out? And it's not quite active out there yet, is it?
Yeah, there's rumblings. If you look at like what a ZK proof is, zero knowledge proof, it's really something that you can verify happened. So if you look at it from that lens with data, it gives you more robust ways to say have data off chain, like medical records, but still have proof of them on chain. It's like one of the more interesting use cases we've heard be like a KYC oracle, if you will. So something on chain that can prove, hey, this address is a human, and we can verify it with the ZK proof, but you don't actually need any of their identity on chain.
Okay.
I think there's some really cool applications that could come out there.
Because it's pointing to another server where they do have that access, but it's covered, but they can at least confirm that it exists, essentially, right?
Exactly.
So zero knowledge proof. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Good lesson there. I'm looking at woven.xyz. So this was one of, I believe, your clients, right? Is this on the Tezos chain?
They are.
Yeah.
Those guys are awesome. You guys should check them out if you haven't already. They're crude elevator pitch from my end is they're building a Shopify for NFT creators or on-chain artists. So they've got really cool payment tools, and then indexing across 5 different chains, including Tezos, to pull in all that artwork.
Wow, fascinating. So how do you guys factor in, like, where do they need the indexing company to make this run smoothly?
Yeah, so we go get that data for them. So they're really great at the user experience, products, the whole shopping experience. They focus on that. They've got the database, and we help them get all this data from all these chains into that database. And then they have all this proprietary logic around being able to say, this is the artist that created this artwork, and kind of pulling in, say, off-chain bios that belong to those artists. And so we help them put all that together and stream it into something usable for them.
Wow. And so is that kind of the crux of the service you offer often, is like actually for platforms that are looking to use data from several different blockchains and kind of aggregate it, I guess, and use it for their own project or their own platform? Is that kind of one of your core services?
It's a big part of it, yeah. Especially, or I should say, it's one of the biggest underserved needs. So looking at, say, just NFTs on Tezos and Ethereum, they're entirely different. There is no unified API for those two. So trying to merge those two data streams is, as far as I know, there's not another service out there doing it.
No doubt. Stephen, any thoughts on that, on Woven specifically, and then the kind of pitch?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Brock said. Those guys are awesome too. I think you nailed it. I am curious though, David, like, as a content creator, how do you think about data? How do you think about, you're putting it out there, you're using River or whatever you're using, to create the tooling and all that kind of stuff. Where would you like to see things go?
Well, I mean, as far as the user experience, making it a little bit easier to integrate, blockchain, basically activity that we have going on, like we have a lot going on both Ethereum and Solana. So and Tezos actually. So we're collecting NFTs as kind of a gallery to support artists. The main crux of the show is really to promote the creator economy on Web3 and in the blockchain, but also, the builders and the creators kind of pushing things forward. So personally, I agree that user experience could be easier, but it also just comes down to bandwidth, I think. And, like a one click, here's everything I'm doing on the blockchain in one space would be kind of cool, but it does maybe run counter to the decentralized narrative, right? And I feel like that's always the balancing act. It's like, it would be awesome to be able to get everything, nicely streamlined for myself in one spot. But on the flip side, maybe I should have to just go over to that blockchain and get that information and send it out. And I also think that the metaverse is doing a good job of trying to pull that all together. So like we have Plot in the Voxels metaverse, for example, and there I can have like, this is my Tezos gallery, this is my Ethereum gallery, and this is my Solana gallery, and we can kind of share it all, the art there in one place. So, I think that there's definitely a place to have data be more easily like synced together, and being able to show everything that an individual or a person is doing on chain very simply would be good. But on the flip side, I think a little bit of exploration and needing to know where to look is also a good thing. So I don't know. I don't have a clear answer for you there, but I think that the more simple, the better. But, I'm a fan of decentralization more so than centralization. So wherever that lands us.
It'll be interesting to see where podcasts go. Like writing makes a lot of sense, that if you put out a content piece and then, somebody at Forbes, they want to reference it or something, there's royalties to be had there. It's a clear path.
Yeah, and on that sense, that's a good point as far as like micro content. And if I put out like pieces of the podcast and wanting to know like who's actually seeing it, am I monetizing this properly, and am I getting, some kind of value back for it? Yeah, that would be amazing to be able to see that for sure.
Yeah, if you can get that data and you can know exactly who's listening to it, well, I mean, it'll be interesting. At least even the metadata. I guess you can kind of see that now, but with podcast, because it's audio, I guess I'm kind of interested to see how it comes together. I'm paying attention to music and things like Sound XYZ and how they're doing it, and then I'm not sure how podcasting is going to fit into that whole mold, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and even Sound.xyz, have they dabbled in podcasting at all yet? I'm sure they would let you probably upload a podcast on there, but I don't know that it would be the best, best platform for that. But it's an interesting platform as far as music goes, and trying to monetize it and make it a little bit more equitable than, say, a Spotify or anything like that.
Totally. So anyway, just I thought I'd get your input. I think that's interesting. So thanks.
Most definitely. And I think it's, it's a good question to see how can we make sure content creators online are essentially getting their worth and getting value back for stuff that goes out there. And I have seen, people clip random clips of my podcast and put it out there, and I didn't even know they did it. And it's just like, in the end, it kind of sucks, but at the same time, it's promotion, so we'll take it. But yeah, that's always a thing. So do you think, like, how far out are we from on-chain data being more prevalent? I think that we can all agree that on-chain data is a good solution for the current kind of status quo of data, which is people don't have any idea how it's being used. They just know that they allow, any app on their phone to use it. How far away are we from that on-chain data being more accessible and people actually, having more of an understanding of how their data is being used? And then I have a follow-up question too. Maybe we'll start with you, Brock, and then go to Steven.
Oh man, yeah. First piece, I think more data is moving on chain than people realize. So even if you look at some like social applications these days, I think it's turned at the forefront of a lot of it. You got the Farcasters of the world kind of putting it out there. It's on chain. There's also an off chain element. But I think we'll start to see more and more of that, especially in that hybrid lens, if you will. I think the data itself in bulk may not exist on chain, but kind of rolling up those proofs or those pointers on chain, choose something off chain makes a lot of sense. I think we'll see more and more of that.
Do you think it makes sense for some of these social media companies, like let's say a Twitter or X now, or even Instagram, to start using on-chain data and then kind of using it almost like as a ethical pitch, right? Like, our data is on chain, it's all yours, you own it, and like actually just turning the page on kind of the antiquated kind of traditional way that data is being used right now. Again, acknowledging that the way it's being used now is super lucrative for people. So who's going to take that first step to actually turn the page on it? But I do feel from like a PR standpoint, like kind of like what Apple did, frankly, and we know they're not perfect on data either, but they said, oh no, you have the option to opt out of all these random apps that are, forcing you to basically like pillage your data. So now you have that option, and Facebook got mad at them and tried to sue them, I think. So, it's kind of an interesting little bit of a corporate spat there, but I think the next step is for people to actually like be demanding that their data is on chain and that they have actual ownership of it. So what do you think it's going to take for us to get there?
That's where I was like, I think the two avenues that I see are, you have somebody the Farcasters, like the Lenses of the world, reaching some sort of critical mass that they're able to like truly compete. But I think we're a ways out from there, from like having the everyman using these platforms. Conversely, I think kind of going into say a Twitter, you got to give them the incentive model. So it's not like they don't necessarily care about data sovereignty because they're making money off of not having it sovereign, right? But if you could incentivize them in some way to earn on royalties or give access to this, like maybe it's an alternative to having to serve an API. They just have the data out there and it's royalty based. That could start to make sense for them. I think you'd see adoption that way.
Sure. Any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I was going to say, people say they want to own their data, but at least when we went for 3 years and pitched all these companies to own their data, that was not, they said it, but they didn't actually mean it. So they needed some other reason. But where we are seeing some interesting things play out, like we're talking to an options exchange, and like they are interested in IPFS for the sole purpose of they can't go down. They're backing up their data systems is really, really important. And so they take redundancy seriously. And so this is a way that, oh man, if everything goes down in these two data centers, we're not actually screwed. We've got a backup in IPFS that we can access. So I think that's one good onboarding mechanism.
Yeah, redundancies and kind of backups, actual safe backups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to Brock's point earlier on the podcast, I think we're moving towards a world where it's like, okay, everything's in the cloud now, but the problem with the cloud is that you can't move it around in the cloud. You can't go from Google to Microsoft with all your data. It's not compatible. And actually, we're talking to Web2 companies that are having those issues, so just applying our infrastructure because their own internal organization, like their systems aren't interoperable. They can't communicate. So, So yeah, I do think that is it makes sense that eventually everything's already up there. Well, if I just have my key now, Google can talk to Microsoft. I can move it around basically. So that seems like a natural evolution in sort of where we're going. The path on how we get there is kind of messy, but it feels like we're going that way.
For sure. And would you say that the indexing company, that's kind of your broader mission? It's not just about necessarily like the on-chain and everything. It's really just kind of changing the conversation around data usage and data indexing. And, you know, what is the percentage of on-chain versus traditional kind of clients, if you can share that?
Brock, you should share that, and then I'll let you share the moonshot.
Yeah, I'd say just from being a small company, go-to-market strategy, most of our customers are on-chain or at least have an on-chain component. And I think that's kind of part of it too, is everyone we're working with now is doing something on-chain and off-chain. So they're merging those worlds already. And so, yeah, for us, we don't want to pigeonhole anybody. Like it shouldn't, in our opinions, it shouldn't be solely on-chain or solely off-chain. Like there's this hybrid approach. And so, yeah, to your point, our bigger mission here is just getting that data accessibility, that data usability. The data's out there. You should be able to use it where it's at. Don't go through centralized providers. Like figure it out in a way that yeah, you can get what you want out of it without having to trust a Twitter, for instance.
Right. And the centralized providers have that flaw, right, what you're talking about with the redundancies, and being able to actually protect against that kind of makes perfect sense. For sure.
Yep.
Very exciting. Yeah, I was thinking, I'm looking at a couple of your other clients that you shared with me, and I was wondering this Bello beta that looks like it's just kind of intelligence of on-chain data. Can you share a little bit about that client? I'm just curious about it. It looks a little bit gamer. It looked like it might be in the Web3 gaming space. Bello.lol.
Yeah, no, they're great. They do NFT analytic information, so a lot of data-driven insights around NFT projects, their creators, the community, and help other NFT creators then understand. Okay, if I want to launch a new project, who are my active owners? What would like work best for them? Even down to okay, like what day of the week should I do this drop on? So that Bello's getting really, really smart about all these insights. Has some very cool tooling around it.
So like an NFT drop strategy house kind of thing?
Yeah, that's just like one part of it. It's holistically just kind of insights for the projects. Yeah.
And is it cross-chain too, or is it just on?
Yep.
the
Yeah,
one chain
cross-chain.
Ethereum.